Hi and welcome to my channel. Almost nobody listened to my stories, so today I went with funny thumbnail. I think this is the last videos. Before I give up with this channel, I would also appreciate you feedback on what I'm doing wrong that nobody is watching. Thanks. My dad worked in security. I got into it after he passed. One night I was called on my night off. They need someone to go fill in on another site. I never worked the site before, but hey, overtime, I accepted. It was one of my dad's old sites, so it's about 2. I am doing a round. I enter one of the buildings, and I think I see someone moving up ahead. It is 2, and the building is locked. There should not be anyone in there. I quietly close the door behind me and creep up for a closer look. At the end of the hall is a security guard, which is odd as I am the only guard on duty at the time. So I am eyeing this guy, and I notice the uniform. It is for a company that doesn't exist anymore. In fact, it is for the company my dad worked for when he was at this site. So it hits me that it is my dad. I'm standing there watching him. He is apparently doing a round of the building I am patrolling. So I watch him. He looks directly at me as if he could see me. He looks at me for about 30 seconds or so. He then turns the corner. I run to catch up with him, but he was gone. Almost 2 years later, I still swear I actually saw him that night. I don't know if it was a ghost, if I was hallucinating because it was one of his old posts and I was emotional, or if maybe somehow time loops exist and I actually saw him working the site in the past. I honestly don't know, but every time I have a night off and they can't find anyone to fill in, I jump at it. No longer for the overtime, but with the hope that whatever happened that first time happens again. I have filled in there over 20 times since that encounter, and I haven't seen anything since. A couple of friends and one hot roommate rented a house in the next city over. 1 floor. Had a partially finished basement. The owner started the job but never completed it. Only the outer walls and 1 interior room were put in. The main area was open with a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. Scattering of old furniture around. My friends used to use the basement to host parties. Apparently, there was a standing request not to sleep down there, a request that I did not hear. We were maybe 20 or 21 at the time. Well, after one party, people started going to sleep wherever they could find space, and I picked the only open spot I could find, this old couch in that basement. I wake up after just a few hours, must have been 4 or 5 a.m., and I hear a guy and girl whispering and giggling in that partially built next room. It sounded like someone who was at the party, so I got up to ask them to be quiet, and as soon as I got near that doorway, it stopped. Weird, but I thought maybe I was hearing people still partying upstairs, and it just sounded like whispering through the floor. No biggie. It didn't start back up, so I decided to ignore it and try to go back to sleep. I laid back down. That bright light was shining in my face, and I wasn't sure how to turn it off, so I closed my eyes and just tried to fall asleep anyways. While I'm laying on the couch with my eyes closed, I saw a shadow move across my eyelids, as if something moved between me and that light. So at this point, I sit bolt upright and said nope, 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 over and over again as I started walking towards the stairs. The cement floor was a bit uneven, so I'd hear a scuffing noise with some of my footsteps, but I'd hear it even when my shoe didn't scrape the floor. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs and listened, and those shuffling footsteps kept going. So I sprinted up the stairs and paused one more time at the top and looked back and saw nothing. I don't know, I expected to see someone. I waited maybe 10 seconds, listening out, and finally I hear what sounds like a single footfall on wood and creak of that bottom stair. I shut the door behind me and backed away watching it, but nothing ever came through. I'm frantically trying to find one of my friends who rented the place without waking anyone up, and I find the roommate on an air mattress in the living room, which is weird, but whatever. I start shaking her and I go, see, wake up. Your basement is haunted. She just looks at me like I'm an idiot and says, duh, we told everyone not to sleep down there. And I just went, oh, so can I crash on the corner of the air mattress? And she said I could. So the next day, I get all of the ghost stories from them about this house. Apparently, the main floor was haunted too, and the basement was just the worst spot for it. Bit of background. When my wife was young, her parents and siblings lived with one set of her grandparents. Her grandfather was murdered in the home. It happened in his bedroom upstairs. The room was used primarily as storage for the next 20+ years. Her parents tried to sell the house multiple times, but living in a small town, everyone knew and the house would not sell, so they stayed. Years later, and while my wife and I were engaged, there was a murder trial which I attended in support of her family. I saw the crime scene photos, important later. Another few years later, we had 2 kids. The oldest was 6 at the time. My wife's family does not talk about the murder, and our kids do not know about the murder to this day. My file decided he wanted the room where the murder happened to be a hangout for the grandkids when the family was in town. He put sleeping bags and a TV in the room ahead of a holiday, days-long get-together. We didn't like it, but stayed silent since the murder was a sore subject. My file also wanted all the grandkids to all sleep in there together. We were the first to arrive, and my son went into the room alone. He usually couldn't sit still long at that age, so after a couple of hours, I decided to check in on him. Here is our conversation. During the whole conversation, he was still and rigid and would not look away from the TV. "Hey buddy, is everything okay up here?" "Yeah, okay, have fun." "Daddy, do I have to sleep in here?" "I don't want to." "Why not?" "I am not alone." Every hair on my body stood up. "Well, yeah, I'm here with you, buddy." "No, there is someone in here with us." "Are they nice? Mean? A grown-up? A kid?" "A grown-up." "What are they doing right now?" "They are watching you." "You have never said anything like this at your grandparents' house before, and you have been here a lot." "They don't leave this room, and I have never been in here before." "Where are they now?" Without looking away from the TV, he points to the far corner where his great-grandfather was murdered and said, "They are standing over there. They don't move much." "Okay, buddy, you don't have to stay in here," and he left the room with me. I was walking home one night from my grandmother's house. We lived in a village in rural Ireland. Granny's house was on the outskirts of the village, so I had to walk up a narrow country lane to get to Granny's house and back down the lane to get toward the village. My granddad was dying, and the priest have him the last rites. He pulled through the night, and my granny told me to go home and get a bit of a rest. I reluctantly agreed and walked home. Down the country lane I've been walking on since I was a boy. Only this time it seemed weird in some way. Almost eerie, and I never get spooked. I pushed the feeling to the side as my mind was in shock about Granddad. I was walking toward the bottom of the lane when I noticed a blur of white down the bottom of the lane beside one of the farmer's gates to the field beside my grandparents' house. I thought it was a lamb escaped. It happens a lot. I walked toward it to investigate. When I walked toward the blur of white, it felt like electricity entered every inch of my body. The hairs were standing up on my arms and what was left on the top of my head. I stood frozen in perpetual fear, as the figure was an old hunched woman in a white robe, and she just screamed the most merciful scream. The guttural scream was so frightening, I actually stopped breathing with sheer fear. I looked up into her face and saw nothing, just a blur. The cry was ungodly, like a mother finding out their child is dead. The most scariest scream I've ever witnessed. Adrenaline must have kicked in because I legged it straight back up the lane toward Granny's house and legged it in the front door. I could hear my granny rushing out Granddad's room crying. She said, "Granddad's gone." Imagine he just passed away within the 5 minutes of me leaving and encountering the woman on the lane. I remember telling my elderly aunt and a few family members about the woman, and they said that she was a friend of the family by now. She only appears when someone is going to die. I thought they were taking the piss until my father, a born skeptic and very religious man, confirmed the woman's existence. In some families in Ireland, she would be called the Banshee. I'll never forget her. Not even when I'm on my own deathbed will I ever forget the howl. Thank you. take some time to type this. It's a little long, but still scares me every time I think about it, and I still can't comprehend it. When I lived in Oregon, I worked IT for the community college. I wasn't getting out until 9 to 10 p.m. by myself. It was a normal day like any other. By the time I left work, it was pitch black, and the thick underbrush made it even harder to see. This will be important later. I drove through town and finally got to the highway that led from Lincoln City to Corvallis, which was a long stretch of empty highway that ran 1+ hours through the forest. After about 45 minutes, I got to the hill that split into 2 lanes on both sides. As I accelerated in my tiny lawnmower of a car, I noticed something moving alongside the guardrail. Okay, I thought, it's a deer, no big deal, just slow down and avoid the cute little bugger. I was extra careful, because that thick underbrush meant each side of the road would be a deep well of blackness that could have any little critters hiding there, waiting to jump into your windshield. Well, before I could finish that thought, I saw feet. If you're from Oregon, you know the homeless situation is abysmal. It wouldn't be too strange for one of them to be hitchhiking out here, but it was definitely out of sorts this late at night. Well, I decelerated to about 65, I was going 70+, and kept an eye on those white shoes walking up the road. By the time I actually realized those were legs/shoes walking, the man darted out in front of my Nissan, in what I thought was a suicide attempt. I slammed on the brakes, trying to avoid him, I'm getting goosebumps just typing this, and ended up sliding sideways, going 60 mph in the opposite lane while the man ran out in front of me, relentlessly. All I could see was his red plaid shirt and his body as he hit the hood of my car. When I came to a stop, he was leaning on the hood, staring directly at me. The primal fear I felt was something I didn't even know existed. The high beams of my car didn't even pierce whatever this man was. It was the blackest shadow, a void. Then in an instant, he vanished. Gone. I was breathless, absolutely breathless, shaking, thought I'd killed someone. I sat in the opposite lane, sideways, breathing heavily for a minute or two. I couldn't help but scream at that point and pound on my accelerator to get out of there. I called my husband, screaming and crying that I just killed a man, but that he disappeared and I didn't know what was happening. I left the scene, I know, illegal. By the time I got home, 30 minutes later, I was still shaking. I got out of my car and ran to the hood, seeing no dents, no handprints, nothing. I didn't sleep that night. Here's where it got more messed up. The next day at work, I researched deaths on that highway and found that a man rolled his truck with his wife and child inside. All 3 died. I highlighted his name and input it into Facebook. The first profile that came up was a memorial for that man. In his profile photo, he wore a red plaid shirt. I returned a few weeks later. In that same area where my skid marks were was the guardrail. Tied to that guardrail was, and probably still is, a moldy child's toy, a rabbit. Something is deeply, deeply haunted about that highway. I'm just glad there wasn't anyone in the oncoming lane, or I too would be trapped there along with that man. Whoever he was. When I was younger, we lived in my grandparents' old house. They built a new one and had moved. The house was always creepy. There was a long hallway with no windows from the kitchen down to the end to the pink bathroom. That was the kids' bathroom, and I always hated it. I hated that hallway. Whenever we were in the living room, you would always catch someone standing at the door into the hallway out of the corner of your eye. Sometimes something would pass and block the light in the hallway. At night, we'd always hear running on the roof. Our roofs are flat, and there is a stairway that leads to the roof from inside the house. Back and forth, like they were playing catch-up there. But I think the creepiest things that would happen were, 1, we'd always see our mother. Either in the hallway walking into her room or the kitchen, or she would come to our room and say something at the door, same hallway, and then turn and walk into her room. When we would follow her into the room she went into, she wouldn't be there. She would either be in a different part of the house or not be at home entirely. 2, I was asleep on the top bunk of our bunk bed. My 2 sisters and I slept in the same room. I remember waking up late at night to the sound of my mother calling me. The voice was echoing, so it sounded like it came from the bathroom that was between our room and my parents' room. I got up, put my feet on the ladder, and was about to climb down when I looked down at the bottom bunk. It was a queen-sized bed, and found my mother asleep with my sisters. She'd usually read to us every night and probably fell asleep. While I was staring at her, I heard my mother calling me again, and I remember I froze. I just kept quiet. My mind was trying to make sense. I was only about 8 or 9 years old. The voice was getting a bit impatient or angry. I was frightened, and all I could do was climb back into bed and get under the covers to wait for the voice to stop calling me. I think it called me another 2 times and stopped. I don't even remember falling asleep. That was one of the scariest memories I have from that house. I hated it. We don't believe in ghosts. We believe in jinn, which are entities that can live in older areas, abandoned, placed, and out in the deserts. But if you build in areas which were previously desert, like in our case, you could be building in places where they inhabit. Some are good, some are not, but we've been taught not to interact with them and respect boundaries. I believe I've posted some or more of these in the past on here, but I'll do it again anyway. I lived in Indianapolis at the time, and I used to go to a restaurant and bar called the Gaslight Inn. As of 2023, the building is still there, but the restaurant is gone. This place was pretty old and had served as a speakeasy during Prohibition and was frequented by bootleggers and gangsters who happened to be passing through. At one point, a ghost adventure type show had done an investigation there. You could also schedule ghost tours. I went one night with my mom and her husband for dinner. It was a relatively slow night, but the food was always banging. We were seated in the bar area, and towards the back was a more open area with more tables, but it was closed with chairs on the tables. There was an older couple at a table near us, and the man was a bit drunk and a little loud. I had to go take a leak, so I made my way back to the other, closed part of the place where the bathrooms were. As I get to the bathroom, I hear the drunk guy get up and head towards the bathroom. I close the door, lock it, and do my business. Right when I'm about to wash my hands, the door handle jiggles. I say, "I'm in here." A couple seconds later, it jiggles again. I'm like, what the fuck? So, as it's still jiggling, I unlock and halfway aggressively swung the door open, expecting to see the drunk dude standing there, but he's all the way across the room, kind of pacing back and forth. I was a little freaked out for sure. This is when I lived in Greenfield, IN, probably around 2005. We had an old IGA that was in a pretty old strip mall. I was in there one night around 9 p.m. or so. Store was mostly empty. As I was coming around the corner into the bread aisle, I saw a loaf of bread move straight up from the top rack on its own and then arc over and fall onto the floor. I walked over and picked it up and put it back. I told the cashier what I saw, and she seemed a little freaked out. When I was really young, I lived in a small town in Indiana called Flora. It's in Carroll County. Several members of my family lived there as well, having moved from Indy and all over, and had been there a few years before I was even born. My aunt and her 3 daughters and their kids, my grandmother, and obviously my mom and dad. My mom met my dad there. We all lived on the same street basically as well, a big U-shaped street. I lived in the middle bottom part of the U, and my aunt and grandmother lived along the left leg of the U. This was all between 1975 to 1985, since I moved to Indy in 1985 when I was 7. The first incident here was when my mom was making dinner one night, waiting for my dad to come home from work. It was summer and the front door was open, but we still had a storm door shut. She was at the sink with her back towards the living room and front door. She said she felt someone flip her ponytail, and she turned expecting to see my dad, but no one was there. Then our cat freaked out, hissed, and took off and hid under the bed. Mom said he wouldn't come out for a long time. Then there was an incident where my aunt's daughter found her young daughter fighting over a Barbie with something she couldn't see, kind of doing the tug-of-war with it, and when her mom came around the corner, whatever it was let go, and the little girl fell backwards. In that same house in the basement, there was a wooden board propped up and held by cinder blocks. They moved the blocks and the wood and found a cobblestone tunnel about 4.5 feet high, solid with spider webs. My mom and a friend of hers decided to go explore it, so they wore long sleeves and pants and gloves taped to their clothes. They took a broom and a flashlight and went in. She said they walked a solid 2 hours in the tunnel. The tunnel would branch off pretty often, and they kept to the left, and they never found the end of it. But they said that occasionally there would be a spot where you could see the local businesses from below. The tunnels went all over town. My mom said when they came back, they put the board back up and a couple blocks to keep it shut. But every time they went down there, the blocks were moved and the wood was off to the side, with the tunnel wide open. I found out later that the town was built on an old Indian settlement. My old house and the houses on the bottom part of the U was on the top of a big hill, and the bottom of the hill was a creek. My aunt's house, along with countless others, were said to be part of the Underground Railroad, and that's what the tunnels were. There were lots of little anecdotes about creepy stuff happening in that town. A sigh loud enough to wake up my mom that sounded like it came from the whole house, and then seeing an elderly couple walking down our street in old-timey clothes at 3 a.m. right after is another example. This always feels ridiculous to write or say. My dog had a heart issue, and in his middle age it got the better of him. One night he collapsed, so we took him to the emergency vet. We didn't live in the sticks or anything, but between our suburb and the next suburb over, there's a road that goes through so old farmland from decades ago that still hasn't been developed on. Anyway, the significance of that is that A, this road is poorly lit, and B, this road has no sidewalk. As we're driving up this road, Mom and Dad in the front and me in the back, with Vinny on Mom's lap, we see in the car lights what looks like an old lady walking on the side of the road, dressed in a very cartoonish old lady outfit, shawl, headscarf, pushing those trolleys old ladies have. And by the way, it was pissing down with rain. This isn't the kind of road where you'd usually see people walking, let alone at night and in the rain. It doesn't lead to anywhere except parkland, at least in the immediate sense. Eventually you'll reach suburbia, and there are no bus routes that use this road either. It's an arterial road, but effectively looks like a country road. While we didn't have to swerve to avoid her, we certainly didn't see her until she was quite close. Anyway, we didn't stop. Maybe that wasn't very charitable, but we were caught by surprise and on our way somewhere important with a sick dog. But after we drove past her, at like 80 kilometers per hour, the speed limit of this road, Vinny looked at Mom, then Dad, then me, and he just seemed at peace. It was odd, because usually he was the kind of Jack Russell that couldn't sit still, which is what killed him, ultimately. And because she gave us such a shock by just being where she was at that time of night, I did look out the back window to see if she was there, but I couldn't see her. However, that could have just as easily been because it was nighttime. The road is poorly lit, and we were driving away from her at 80 kilometers per hour. Fast forward, and we get to the emergency vet, still a 15-minute drive from where we passed the old lady on the road. Vinny is taken in to stay overnight to be monitored, and we decide to go home after having been at the vet for maybe an hour or 90 minutes. 5 minutes after we arrive home, we get a phone call telling us Vinny saw a cat, got excited, and had a heart attack. My beautiful dog had passed away. Anyway, the odd thing that struck me was that the random old lady probably could have walked from where she was to the vet between the time we saw her and the time we got the call that Vinny had died. So in my head, I've always wondered if she was some sort of psychopomp who was walking to meet Vinny and take him to wherever dead dogs might go. I don't buy into this sort of stuff, and aren't religious either. The truth is, she was probably just an old lady who was walking on the road late at night and in the rain, for God knows what reason. But nonetheless, that's the facts of it. But the acceptance of the situation that Vinny seemed to exhibit right after we passed her weirded me out a bit. I'm sure it's just me trying to make nice stories to lessen the blow of the loss, as so many do with afterlife concepts. But even so, I'll never truly know until it's my own turn to die. Let's put it this way though. When my following dog Spot passed away, on the way to the vet, I was on the lookout for ferrymen disguised as old ladies, come to take my treasured dog away from me and break my heart all over again. No matter how much you tell yourself that the supernatural isn't real, you just can't shake your own lived experiences of it, even if they are, probably, just figments. When I was little, I would spend hours in my bedroom alone, playing with my Barbies. On one occasion, I was in my room, playing while my mom and brother were in another room, playing games on our computer. Every now and then, I could hear them laughing and talking, but it wasn't loud enough for me to take serious notice of. In the middle of playing, I heard a loud laugh coming from my closet. I was facing the direction of my closet and bedroom door, which were right next to each other, so I knew there wasn't any way of my brother sneaking in on me. It wasn't a quiet laugh either. I've always described it as sort of a witch's cackling. I remember when I finally got the courage to stand up, that I booked it out of my room, went to my brother's room, and being so confused why I heard someone laughing in my closet when there were only 3 of us home. After that, I could never sleep in my room by myself or go in there without a light on. Fast forward a couple years and my family has moved to a different house. I would still get a weird vibe every now and then, but nothing that would totally freak me out. I was still scared of sleeping alone, so some nights my brother and I would sleep in my room together, or we would sleep in his, where he had a bunk bed. On one of the days where we slept in his room, he slept in the bottom bunk while I was on top. I've always had problems with not being able to sleep through the night and waking up randomly early in the morning, so on this day it happened, but I thought nothing of it. While I was trying to fall back asleep, I vividly remember facing my brother's closet and barely shutting my eyes when I heard the same exact laugh I heard a few years before, except this time right behind me. There wasn't any space behind me except for my stuffed animal that was separating me from the wall, so you could imagine how absolutely terrified I was. I couldn't move for what felt like forever, and when I peeked over the edge to see if my brother was messing with me, he was knocked out snoring. It hasn't happened again since then, but I still think about it when I'm home alone or waking up in the middle of the night. We had already had multiple instances of haunting in the apartment. The bathroom was the center of it. You could pull the shower curtain shut, leave the room for a couple of seconds, and the curtain would be open a few inches. Didn't matter how long you left. 10 minutes, an entire day, 3 seconds, that fucking curtain wouldn't stay closed. I have 2 friends that are lightning rods for weird shit. They both saw the same thing. A teen girl, pale except for her hair, sitting and clutching her legs, rocking back and forth in the tub. The apartment was situated at the bottom of a hill, so the back side of it was underground. There was a door in the breezeway that led to what we Alabamians call a crawl space, even if it's large enough to stand in. In the crawl space, you could see the back walls of my apartment, as well as the apartment across the hall. Both of them just smooth drywall, until you got to where that fucking bathroom would be. There, the drywall was ripped and torn. The only other important thing about the crawl space is that it was ventilated by a gap on a far wall, covered with a standard slotted vent cover. It was maybe 7 feet up the wall from the inside. From the outside, the vent was a few inches above the ground. When we decided to move, the new place offered a free month. You could take it up front or spread it out over the lease. We took it up front, overlapping it with the end of our lease at the old place. This gave us a nice, easy month to leisurely move. I promise I'm getting to the creepy shit. So we take our time, and toward the end of the month I was packing up our closet, which shared a wall with the haunted bathroom. My fiancé was packing up the master bathroom closet, which shared the perpendicular wall with the haunted bathroom. It's dark and oppressive in the apartment. This is nothing new. Situated semi-subterranean, one doesn't expect a lot of light, but it's not just dark, it's pushing down on our shoulders, drawing our eyes to the floor. A crunch then, as something stabs into the corner of the walls from the side of the bathroom. It drags down, sounding like nothing so much as claws rending through plaster, scratching deeply as if trying to get to us both. I froze. So did she. Babe? She asked. Meaning, was that me? Did I fall or scrape something? No. And we fled as the sound of a kettle whistle came from nowhere, the pitch growing higher and higher. I heard an angry shriek that wasn't Laura. It was a week before I went back with one of my lightning rod friends. We took the long way around, choosing to walk around the side of the building and down the hill instead of taking the stairs. There, on the grass, lay the vent cover, easily 8 feet away from the gap in the mortar, as if it had been blown out with great force. We walked into the apartment, and I swear there's more light in there than there's ever been. My shoulders were light. My friend looked at me and nods. There's nothing here, I say. She's gone. That's when I realized that she knew we were leaving. And she was fucking pissed that she couldn't torment us anymore, and she left, blowing out the grate on the vent as she did so. There's a part of me that wants to know if she's just a manifestation of the thing I saw when I was 5. It felt the same in my gut, and that chills me, because it means this thing is following me, and I really don't want to see her again. When I was about 7, I visited my aunt's house during the summer in Columbus, Ohio. It's been passed down through family since it's been built. It has this old barn across the pond that's been leaning since 1930. Before the barn was being used for old boats and bass food, it was a blacksmith workshop built sometime around 1870 to 80. I was with my sister, who was just a bit older, and we ran around the lake to the old barn just ahead of my father and aunt. As I round the trees to the barn, my aunt hollers, "Don't play in the barn, there's copperheads and spiders." I look up to the transom window. I see a man, looked about 30. He almost looks like he's peering out with a big smile. Without really thinking, I yelled, "Hey, what are you doing in there? You're gonna get bit." I look back to tell my aunt and dad, but can just barely see them rounding the corner. I looked to my sister, and we both looked back to the barn, and the man was gone. The ladder and walkway were firewood years ago anyway, from what I heard, so there's no way someone could be up there. I ran to the barn just like I was told not to, and ran right just up to the door and looked in, but it was silent. Not a breeze. Every single hair stood up on my arms, neck, and back. It had to have been around 90 degrees and like walking through a wet blanket out there, but when I stepped one foot in that barn and I was frozen. I wasn't scared, as I didn't even know what just happened, but I was confused, as was my sister. We turned back and asked my aunt who the man in the was, and she gave my dad a concerned look. That's what scared me. We walked around and didn't see anyone, so we headed back to the house. Just until a couple of years ago, I was doing some research on my family history, and my uncle was brought an old safe that was held by a family friend. No one in the family knew it existed. Not even the family that held it in their basement for who knows how long. They had gotten it open, and there were birth and death certificates along with photos and drawings. A blue handkerchief is what stood out to me, though, as if it was the same withered one I saw tied around of the neck of that man I saw in the barn. Even the smell of opening that safe reminded me of that day. I looked through the small stack of old black and white Kodak photos. One of them from May 1910 with the name Emmett on the back, and has the same exact man standing at the barn doors with an Appaloosa and thoroughbred, wearing a light long sleeve with a dark handkerchief around his neck. After I told my cousin about the whole thing, I go to message my sister the picture of Emmett. She called back freaking out, saying she had forgotten all about that and always thought it was our imagination or lack of sleep. No. The next day, I called my father, and we talked about the first trip we took out there as a family and everything he remembered, if he remembered my sister and I yelling at someone in the barn. If anyone was in our family named Emmett. He remembered every bit of it. He didn't tell us for obvious reasons, but Emmett was my great-grandfather. He lived on that land with his parents till he died in that barn. I looked through the death certificates, and there were Emmett's. Says nothing but May 1910, blacksmith shop. I tried not to ask my aunt much, but as much as she heard, there was an ox yoke or something that was being lifted to store in the rafters and came back down and hit him right in the head. 34 years old. Damn shame. Now and then I'll go back there. I make sure I go and just give some warm energy by the old barn, sing some old songs. It's always felt more welcoming. Feels like I have a connection to him even when my elders don't. I haven't seen him since I was a child, but I feel stillness whenever I visit. I was 19, sleeping with my then boyfriend at my parents' house in a single bed. He was facing the wall, sleeping on his side, and I was on the outer side, sleeping on my back. 16 years later, I still never fall asleep on my back out of fear. Since it was a super small single bed, our bodies were touching. We were both deep asleep, and I woke up in the middle of the night feeling something is very wrong, like in a nightmare kind of atmosphere. I went to turn around and hug my boyfriend and realized I can't move at all. I got scared and started to wake up more. I still felt like in a nightmare, but tried to be calm and rationalize things. I lucid dream a lot, so I do some mental checks with recognizing objects in my room. All this time there's this awful buzzing in my ears, and I'm still not sure if I'm awake. I'm completely paralyzed and scared, and only my eyes are moving. So I start the checking. The room is dark, but I recognize stuff. I see my sweater on my chair, the food I left on my desk from before, and I hear my boyfriend snoring. I even feel his body touch to mine and feel his breathing. The moment I realized I'm not dreaming, but I'm awake, I started really panicking and tried to call my boyfriend. And then the horror began. No sound is coming out of me. I start panicking more and more. I'm literally screaming, but it's dead silence. He is next to me, right next to me, and I can't ask him for help. I gathered all my panic and strength, and I screamed the loudest I could and pulled myself from the paralyzed state. And I managed to pull my upper body up and be in a sitting position. But I realized something is even more wrong. My boyfriend was still asleep and snoring, and I felt really weird and light maybe, and still no sound is coming out of me. So as I was sitting, I looked back, saw my boyfriend sleeping first, then turned around some more, and saw myself still lying down, paralyzed with my eyes wide open like I'm dead. I was detached from myself on my upper body. I was like a ghost leaving my body, but still one piece, myself, attached on my lower body. I got so scared that I slammed myself back on the bed, trying to get back in my body. When I fell back, I felt like I was choking and taking really big breaths at the same time. I was in agony fighting for my life. And then I don't know to explain this since I never saw them in a full form, only shadows or dark masses of energy, but I just knew. Female entities came over my bed. I don't know how, but I knew that they are female, and one of them was very old and the other one young. The older one just pressed my chest and told the younger one, "She is not ready yet." And it was the moment I gained my breath. I was back in my body. I was able to move, and I let out the biggest scream that awoke the whole house. My boyfriend jumped scared shit, my parents ran to my room scared out of their minds, and all I could do was cry hysterically. I couldn't explain to nobody, so I just said I had a bad nightmare and didn't realize I was screaming, apologized for waking them up, and definitely didn't sleep that night. I always sleep in a fetal position, just in case all these years.